Shalom Aleichem, Hayim Erev Shabbos Kodesh. Today is Friday. It's Erev Shabbos Kodesh Pashas Neach. The Neach is connected to a Mabel. So the Sheni Neach is connected to an Elam Chodesh. It's a mikveh Tara that cleans up the whole world. And like the Rabbi spoke in Tavshin and Aleph in the Mamer, that Neach goes on Eichel Al-Yenim and Eichel Al-Tachtenim, Menucha, L'chai Elamim. Leibish the bench in Yidin b'chol mokum shehem, u'befrat b'artzeinu ha'kadosh ha'erez asher tomed eini havaya lekecha bo, Breishis ha'shona v'ad achris shona, mit sholem u'menucha, u'hatzlacha u'bracha, and no pachad, v'cherev shol sholem le'isava ba'atzechan, alachas kama v'kama erge from them. And it's Hey Marchesh. So we're still in the spirit of the Simchas of Tishrei, till Zayim Marchesh and Chol HaPachas, and after that we'll have to find a way of continuing it. Even beyond that, based on the principle of Ma'ilem HaKodesh, v'chuli v'chuli, the Rebbe shall mention Yidden mit B'tachan and Simcha and Shalom and Ava and Atzlacha and Bracha. Now, this is the second class on the Mamer, Leis and Niflaos deals about the Kilo and Chaste, which the Rebbe said Shabbos Breishis, but it was a Hemshech to the Simchas Torah of Tavshin Lamed Daled. And the Simchas Torah Dika Mamer, it's about the Psukim of Akofis. In the last shir, which was over an hour and a half, I don't know, I haven't yet put it all together yet, but it's more than an hour and a half, we learned most of the Mamer. What we learned in the Mamer is that Leis and Niflaos deals of Ade is nothing. Look at the Eibush it's Liosei. I'll see a gufnis etzli is better. But Kila Chaste, the idea that we can be Mamshech Atzmos, and Mamshech Atzmos till Lamata Mata, and this is only through a Yidden. This is Leis and Niflaos deals Levade, that only the Eibush knows the great Pele that there exists, and this idea that Yidden are able to accomplish this effect, and the language that the Rebbe used to represent what Yidden are able to accomplish is the language of Makache Shmecha. The Makadesh is Hashem. We had Kedusha to Shmoisha LaKadosh Baruch Hu. And like we discussed, that in an earlier Mamer, the reason Yidden are able to Makadesh is Hashem is because Shem is lower than Oir, Kadesh Atav and Eira Shmecha. But in this Mamer, the Rebbe added that Yidden are Makadesh is Hashem, even though Shem is higher than Eir. Ata Kadesh V'Shimcha Kadesh. Ukafish and Isbaya Liel Ba'arichas. We discussed it in the last class. But I deliberately divided this Maimid into two very uneven parts, because to me, one of the novelties of this Maimid is the place, the pedestal that the Rebbe puts Shabbos Breishis on. The Maimid is saying, in short, that a Yid reaches Atzmos. A Yid is one with the Eibishter, and because the Yid is with the Eibishter, he reaches the Eibishter, and on that basis is able to renew the Eibishter's Melucha on Rosh Hashanah, and affect Mitzvah Hashem Echapa and Yom Kippur, and the Kol Ezech Mitzvah Yesh B'Sukkos on Sukkos, and the Makache Shmecha, which he talked about. Leis and first by the Kili Elam Chasdei, which is Makache Shmecha. Yimamshech Atzmos into Shmoi, even Shmoi, which is one with Atzmos Amos. And the Rebbe went through Tishrei. He said that this theme of Makache Shmecha, this theme of Kili Elam Chasdei, has to do with the koyach of Atam Nitzav Mayim Kulcham, Lifnei Havaya Lekechem, that the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah, Yidden are one with Atzmos Amhus, and in that koyach, maybe the Eibush becomes the king on Rosh Hashanah, and all the other things, till the Makev of Sukkot, the Pnimi of Sukkot, the Klit of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, Simchas Torah, and so on. And then left over Shabbos Breishis. Because the Rebbe is going to say something about Shabbos Breishis, which is absolutely mind-blowing. Mamish, absolutely mind-blowing. Now, I'm not saying it's the first time this was said, but it's a perspective that's so distinctive. And Oimed Arsheni, you learn my modem like this. If you're lucky enough, you just see what the Rebbe is trying to be mechadish. To try and understand what it means is a whole other dimension. It's a whole, what does it mean that there's the name of the Eibishter, which was one with Atzmos Mamish, and the Yid is adding a Kedusha to that name? What does that mean? And what does that mean? Well, here the Rebbe has gotten even a higher dimension to that, which is the dimension of Shabbos. And I guess if we wanted to talk about it, the way the conversation would go would be this. When you learn in Chassidus about Shabbos, you find a slew of contradictions. Mamish, min akotza lakotza, when it comes to Shabbos. Some Maimorim, we talk about Shabbos, say Shabbos is Teva. Yom Tov is Nes and Shabbos is Teva. It's part of the cycle of the creation. It's just the last day. Some Maimorim speak about Oinig Shabbos, the rest of Shabbos, the pleasure of Shabbos. But the pleasure of Shabbos has to do with the Malacha. 6 weeks you work and the 7th day you rest. But then you have Maimorim, like this one, that puts Shabbos on a pedestal above all the Yomim Tov. What's going to happen in this Mamer is that Rebbe is going to say that the Rosh Hashanah we reveal in the world godliness which is close to the world, and Shabbos is higher than Rosh Hashanah. I want to say that one more time, and I want you to think about this. The Rebbe is going to say in the next 2 pages that the Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh only reveal in the world godliness which is connected to the world, and Shabbos is higher than Rosh Hashanah. Now think about that. Haga ba'atzmacha, right, as they write in the Hanochas. What do we know about Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah is Malchus. Hashem becomes a king. Malchus is Atzmus, right? Malchus is higher than Shem, it's higher than Oir, it's higher than everything. Mashiach is Malchus, the kingship of the Eibishter is ruled in Atzmus Mamish, and Rosh Hashanah we renew the Eibishter trust in the Melucha because we're able to go higher than the place of the Siluk and renew the Melucha, which is Mushash and Atzmus and Mosein Tzavbarach. In this 2 pages that we're about to learn, the Rebbe is going to say that the Malchus, which Hemshech and Rosh Hashanah, is the Lakus, which is Sheikhas Leilmas. We're talking about the most pnimius godliness which is brought into the world. And in case you don't understand what that means, there's pnimius and chitzonius. Chitzonius means the outer level. The outer level means what the world is per se. When you look at the world, what does the world tell you about itself? That it exists, and that it's alive, and that it's functional, that it's interactive, and that it's integrated. It's a worldly phenomena. And in relationship with the Eibishter, as profound and as beautiful and exact and as orderly as that is, it's called chitzonius. Pnimius is the purpose. Why the Eibishter made it? We should serve him. Of all the things that are connected to the purpose of the Eibishter in creation, few are as high as the Avodah of Rosh Hashanah. Why? Because everything we do throughout the entire year is based on the fact that Hashem is our king. Hashem cares on a pnimius level. Hashem doesn't just keep us alive in a minimum way. Hashem keeps us alive in an absolute way. That interest of the Eibishter in us in an absolute way is connected directly to making him Melech and Rosh Hashanah. So Hashanah is a foundational idea. All of Yiddishkeit, the pnimius of the involvement of Hashem in the world, or the Eibishter's pnimius involvement in the world, is predicated on Rosh Hashanah. Comes again the Lubavitcher Rebbe here. The Rebbe comes along in this Maimon and says, oh, by the way, that whole business is a Lakus HaShayach. As pnimius as Rosh Hashanah is, that it's not only about Hashem sustaining the world, but it's Hashem sustaining the purpose of the world by investing himself. He cares about the creation. Biz atzmus Mosein Tzavbarach till it touches the Eibishter's etzem. That's what the Maimonides is saying. It doesn't come close to Shabbos. It doesn't come close to Shabbos. Why? Shabbos is oinik. Meaning Shabbos is about the Eibishter, which is way beyond any relationship with the world. That's what's going to happen in the next 2 pages. And I had to make that into a class unto itself. And specifically, the Rebbe is going to talk about Shabbos Breishis. And there's going to be a couple of wonderful ideas that the Rebbe is going to say. Number 1, Shabbos is so high that it's higher than the Melucha of Rosh Hashanah, but at the same time, the whole idea of Shabbos is Ba'aretz in the world. And number 2, that just like we discussed, that Mekache Shmecha, Yidden can add a Kedusha to the name of the Eibishter, Yidden can add a Kedusha to the world, by making the Eibishter into a Melech, and by revealing the Tzumah Shem Bechaped, and being Megala, the Kol Ezech, B'Yisrael, Yeshu Basukis, all these Nyanam Atzmiyim, a Yid can add Kedusha even to Shabbos. Meaning, this Shabbos, which the Rebbe here is explaining to us, is even higher than the Avodah of Rosh Hashanah, and the accomplishment of Rosh Hashanah, a Yid can enhance further, because Yisrael are called Mekache Shmecha. So I guess, on the surface, what we're going to be saying is that Tishrei is the head of the year, and the Mekache Shmecha of Tishrei is going to sustain us throughout the year, the being Mamshech Atzmos into the world. So we can add Kedusha to the Eibishter's name, and the highest of levels begins with Tishrei, and it culminates with Shabbos Breishis. And Shabbos Breishis is higher even than Rosh Hashanah, and Shabbos Breishis' trademark is that it's worldly, that it's connected to the world. Those 2 opposites are going to define Shabbos Breishis, and then we're going to compound all of that by saying that a Yid can add an even higher Kedusha to Shabbos. So if you think that in the previous class we were going to these incredibly high points, you can't call them levels, in Atzmos. The name of the Eibush is one with Atzmos. And the Yid is Makadesh is Hashem because he's even higher than that name, because the Yid is one with Atzmos and Hus. That plays out in Rosh Hashanah. Well, now we're going to go higher than Rosh Hashanah. We're going to talk about a Madrege, which has nothing to do with the world, not just the Chitzeniistic world, not even the Pnimiistic world, and this Elokus, which has nothing to do with the world, not on a Chitzeniistic level, and not even on a Pnimiistic level, exists in the world, and it's called Shabbos, and the Yid can be Makadesh as a Shabbos. So on the one hand, Shabbos Breishis is the culmination of Tishrei. It sets the stage for bringing forward the Makache Shmecha of the whole Tishrei into the whole world. And on the other hand, it adds a whole new dimension to the Makache Shmecha, which is beyond the Makache Shmecha of the whole of Tishrei. So there's nothing more holy and lofty than Shabbos, and there's nothing more worldly and earthy than Shabbos. And Yidden contribute to all of that. That's what's going to happen. Now, if I come across excited, I am. If I come across enthusiastic, I am. If I come across a little bit hysterical, I am that also. I just hope I'm not so it's just blowing my mind. What the Rebbe does with Shabbos B'Klal, and what he does with Shabbos Bereishis B'Frat, as it ties into the Makache Shmecha, is just overwhelming. It's overwhelming. So let's begin to read near the bottom of page Nun and understand what's happening. We're in the middle of a Mamer that says Niflaos Gedeles Levade is Liosei, which means Elokus, till the name of the Eibishter, which is higher than the Oir, which is Mein HaMoir, is all Liosei. Legabe HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's Asiya Gufness. And then we say Kili Elam Chaste, that when a Yid is Makadesh es Hashem, Makache Shmecha, he adds a Kedusha which is even higher than all of those things, and that's Taka Apel, right? And then the Rebbe said, this is Tishrei, Atan Nitzavim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah. And then the Rebbe says, V'chol Zanitesa, V'Shabbos Breishis. 4 lines from the bottom of page 1. All of this is enhanced further yet on Shabbos Breishis. Why? Shaboy Nases Ikir Hemshech al Kol Hashana Kula B'Negei L'Oretz Halzu Agashmis. Because Shabbos Breishis is the occasion of all of Tishrei, which affects that the energies of Tishrei, which have to do with Atzmos, which have to do with Makache Shmecha, which have to do with making the Eibush into a Melech, and all the other delectable things, the delightful things, the important things that are connected to the inyan of Tishrei are made physical. Because Shabbos has 2 extremes. It's so high that it's higher than all the Pnimis Dikinyanim of Rosh Hashanah. As you'll see on the next page, that relative to Rosh Hashanah, to Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah is considered Shayach HaLeilamis. And at the same time, Shabbos is a physical day. It brings a life mapos. Now the next few ones are very interesting, and I'm curious to know if there's a Makar in Chassidus for this. The Rebbe is saying something very interesting, that it says about Shvi'is, Ki Tavaya L'Aretz V'Shavs Ha'aretz L'Shabbos L'Hashem. That when Yidden come into Yisrael, they have to count 6 years, and the 7th year is Shemitah. But the way it's brought Makut Torah, based on the Psukim, that the first thing it says you have Shabbos, then you have the 6 days of the year. Even though in reality, you don't count Shabbos, Shemitah, until you have the 6 years that come before it. But spiritually, the first thing is Shabbos. You have Shei Shana V'Gem, Ukvish Medaya, Gaben Hazakin, Makut Torah, and Pachas Bahar, that even though, right, the first 14 years didn't count because with Kafsha B'chol Kudu B'chal no Shemitah. Then they counted 6 years, which is 20 years. And the 21st year after they came into Eretz Yisrael was the first Shemitah. But spiritually, Mashmos HaKos of the implication of the Pasuk is, Kimiyad, Ki Tevei Aras, the moment you're into Eretz Yisrael, V'Shavsa, you already have Shabbos, Kedim Shiaschilu Sheish Hashanah, before you have the work of the 6 years. Ki Kasher HaSchol Hi Be'efen, the Shavsa Orah, the Shabbos Havai. Because when you begin your life in this earth, with an attitude that the first thing is Shabbos, Harayu Nimshech, Hayzapeil, the Nimshech or Peil Gam, it affects and is brought into the Kolash Hemshech Shesham, the whole duration of the 6 years of Avodah, that there should be Be'efen, now there should be the highest of levels. And the Rebbe said the same is true, Shabbos Breishis, which is Peil V'Nimshech Kol Hashana Kula. Shabbos Breishis is the first Shabbos, and you Kitavayu Al Aretz with Shabbos. You come into the world with Shabbos. So there's 2 sides to this Kitavayu Al Aretz with Shabbos. The first side is what says in Likkutei Torah. You come into the world with a Shabbos-dik attitude. And the other side of this is that you can bring Shabbos to the world. The moment you enter into this world, there's a need from Shabbos. Meaning that Shabbos is earthbound. as lofty as Shabbos is, and in this Mamer, Shabbos is going to be placed on a pedestal above Rosh Hashanah, which is mind-blowing. It's pashut mind-blowing. Shabbos is going to be higher than Rosh Hashanah. Now let me just throw in for fun, because some of you are probably thinking it, that we have in the Maimorim, beginning with the Likutei Torah, Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah b'Shabbos, Mikdash Hayoteken, Havalei b'Medina, that you don't blow Shofar Rosh Hashanah when it's Shabbos, because Shabbos replaces the Tkiyah Shofar. But we also say that in the Beis HaMikdash they continue blowing Shofar, which means that as lofty as Shabbos is, in the Beis HaMikdash, the Shofar of Rosh Hashanah is higher than the Tkiyah Shofar of Shabbos. L'chayra, according to this Maimon, there's a Shabbos which is even higher than that, because Tkiyah Shofar and all of its levels is going to be called in this Maimon Hamshachas Achayes Ashayches Le'elamis. That when you blow Shofar Rosh Hashanah, and you have to assume that this includes even how in the Beis HaMikdash they blew Shofar Rosh Hashanah Shecholias b'Shabbos and Zman Bayis Rishon, all Yidden blew. That's still part of Hamshachas Achayes Ashayches Le'elamis. And here the Rebbe is going to tell us there's a Shabbos which is even higher than that. Now you can start asking questions, but that's what the Rebbe is going to do. He's going to put Shabbos on an unbelievable pedestal. But in these few lines, he quoted the Likutei Torah in Parshas Bahar and spoke two things. A, if you start your life off with Shabbos, you have a Shabbos-dika life. And B, Shabbos is earthbound. The moment you come into this world, there's the place for Shabbos. So Shabbos Breishis becomes the culmination of Tishrei in the sense that it brings something very, very lofty into the world. But Shabbos Breishis is the culmination of Tishrei because it brings it into the world. In other words, Shabbos is an Oretztika thing, it's an earthy thing, it's a worldly thing. That's one of the sides of Shabbos. And therefore, Shabbos Breishis culminates Tishrei in bringing everything down. That's the first point. And this is the end of Perek Dalet. If you're looking at the book, at my page Nun to the Naf, you'll see we just finished the last, what we just read, these 8 lines at the end of Perek Dalet, or beginning Perek Hey. Because what the Rebbe said in these 8 lines is that Shabbos Breishis culminates Tishrei in the sense that it's bringing it down, lower. But now the Rebbe is going to change and bring the opposite. That although on the one hand, the whole idea of Shabbos is Oretz, on the other hand, Shabbos is higher than the height of Rosh Hashanah. Shabbos Bereshis has an advantage, even above Rosh Hashanah. The Rebbe explains simple. We all know that Rosh Hashanah is Nikra Reish. Rosh Hashanah is called the head. And of course, all my body, beginning with Yateres Reish, and you have by the Alter Rebbe as well, say you don't call it Chilos Hashanah, you call it Reish Hashanah, because the head is the beginning of life. The head includes the whole body, it fills the whole body, it unites the whole body, it gives life to the whole body. The head includes everything. Every Maila is in the head. Because the date of Rosh Hashanah is comparable to the notion of Reisha Ba'adam, the head of the human being. That it's not just the beginning of the person, but it's Makar Achayis, the Cholei Varim is the source of life to all the limbs. All the limbs, for the duration of their existence, not just when they're created initially, get their life and their existence. From Reish Hashanah, Reish Haguf, the head of the body, feels the body, it integrates the body, it sustains the body, and it keeps the body going. It's the head. And Reish Hashanah is similarly the head of the year, which is why in the 48 hours of Rosh Hashanah, you have the whole year in a microcosm. And then the Rebbe says, that legabe 1 month, it brings life for the entirety of that month. So the Rebbe has a part cuts kasha. Just like you have Reish Hashanah and Reish Chedesh, you should have Reish HaShavua. You should call Shabbos Reish HaShavua. Shabbos should be called the head of the week. Because just like Rosh Hashanah blesses the year and Reish Chedesh blesses the month, Shabbos blesses the week. All the days of the week live from Shabbos. Shabbos includes all the 6 days of the week. That just like Reish Chedesh is Kol Yemei HaChedesh, and Reish Hashanah is Kol Yemei HaShana, Reish Chedesh includes the whole month and Hashanah the whole year. Shabbos includes the whole week. So therefore the Rebbe has a kasha, a klotz kasha. Imkain, accordingly, Lama Nikra Yema Shabbos. Why is Shabbos not called in Torah? Torah Shebeksav, or at least Torah Shebal Peh, B'Shem Reish HaShavua, the head of the week, like Reish Chedesh is the head of the month, and Reish Hashanah is the head of the year. And here comes the teretz. And this teretz is mind blowing. Sheyema Shabbos, that the day of Shabbos. I'm holding number 25. If you're following my text with my scribble and my notes, I'm holding number 25. Sheyema Shabbos, the day of Shabbos. Is not called the head of the week, because Shabbos transcendence over the days of the week that it comes from, and the days of the week that it leads into, it's incomparably removed from those days lagabe yem hashavua in relationship with the weekdays. Meaning, the weekdays have everything to do with Shabbos. The week before gives life to Shabbos, and the week after receives life from Shabbos. And affects the Shabbos. As it says in one Gemara, the food, the work you do before Shabbos. And this doesn't only mean how much money we earn, it means how much birudim we do. The avodah ruchnius feeds the Shabbos. And on the other hand, you have the Zoya, which the Rebbe quoted before. Shabbos, minay, mizborcha, kula yem, in the days after Shabbos, or bevorach min Shabbos. Right? So Shabbos is dependent on the week, and the week is dependent on Shabbos. Just like the year is dependent, Rosh Hashanah is dependent on the year before, and the year after is dependent on Rosh Hashanah. He says, no, it's not the same. It's different. What Shabbos does, both to the work of the week before, which sustains the Shabbos, as well as what Shabbos provides for the week after. The superiority, the loftiness that Shabbos adds to the weekdays is incomparably removed from them, more than the days of the year are removed from Rosh Hashanah, and the days of the month are removed from Rosh Chodesh. Why? The idea of Shabbos is revealing and bringing forward the Eibish's time, the Eibish's pleasure. Like it says in the Pasuk, V'karasa, Shabbos Einig, you're supposed to call Shabbos Einig. And of course, the pshat of the words V'karasa, M'dafaroi Srofen, Lashon Kriya, Lashon Mikra, Kadam Keira Lechaveri, Kava Keira Lebnei, it says in Tanya Seif Perek Lamed Zayin, we're calling Einig Shabbos forward. And the Rebbe says, Inyan Atainuku, you're talking about Hashem's delight. And the meaning of the light is Lamayla Mayamuchrach, it's beyond what is necessary. Mitzad Seder Anagan, the Eibush made a world. And the world needs things in order to exist. And then there's things that the world has that it doesn't need in order to exist. And he illustrates it from a simple halacha in Yerachayim. Ubenusach birchas beir nefashos. So it says in Shulchan Aruch that when you're saying the brachas beir nefashos Shabbos v'chasreina, and then you add the words Al kol meisha beres la'achayes behem. So you have two things. You have number one, neisef ala muchar lechatzerich mili achasarim, the things we must have to sustain ourselves, to provide our body with the vitamins and the minerals and the energy and the cell parts, which otherwise are going to be lacking in the body, are sustained through the food we eat, which is called Beidin Nefashos Shabbos v'chasein, to build the soul and to sustain its deficiencies, its lacks. But Yeshne Gama'in, there's something else, which is Lahachet B'em Nefesh L'choy, to give life and meaning to all living things, which is Tainug, which is delight. So in Halacha, there are two ideas. Hashem giving us what we need to live, and Hashem giving us pleasure. And by the way, if you're talking about the calendar, that's the difference between Tishrei and Nisan. Nisan is barley, Shavuos is wheat. That's better than Chassidus. That's why Pesach doesn't have one Simcha, and Shavuos has only Simcha once. Sukkot is Lahachis B'em Nefesh Kol Choy, Tainug, Peiris. That's why you have Simcha on Sukkot 3 times. So you have 2 dimensions of Eibush sustaining the world. Keeping the world alive and giving the world something the world doesn't need. Now normally, if I were to tell you these 2 ideas, you would associate it with what's called Chitzenius, Elamus, and Pnimius, the world as it is by itself, and the world as it has a purpose. But here the Rebbe does something else. Look, keep going. This puts Shabbos on a pedestal above Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh. Why? Because Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh nasa hamshachas hachayis hashaychas leilamis. Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh bring into the world life that's needed for the sustenance of the world. Not Rabbi say. Rosh Hashanah is the life that's needed for the sustenance of the world. Rosh Hashanah brings down the life which is negated to the pnimius purpose of the world. Til atzmas amhu za yev tchilas masecha ve'emich pnimius kavana al yenim v'neima yarda neshama lamat. The Rebbe takes Rosh Hashanah, which is the ultimate day of pnimius. In other words, it's all about bringing into this world godliness which is not necessary for the world to exist. It's necessary for the world to have a purpose, and he makes that into Beir Nefashos Shabbos Chesreinan. What is in most Maimorim, Pnimius Elamis, over here becomes Chesreinan. The minimum, in order for the world to exist, it has to have a Pnimius HaKavana. And the Pnimius HaKavana of the world is Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh. And he says, Masha'en Ken Yom Shabbos, as opposed to Shabbos. That Nasa Hamshachas Atainuk Shalamayla Me'elamis, it brings into the world the delight which is above the world. And this delight which is above the world is a godliness which is beyond the godliness which is brought down on Rosh Hashanah to be mashlim the kavanah pnimis of the creation. This is mind-blowing. The whole idea of Rosh Hashanah is pnimius. And here the Rebbe is saying that the Pnimis of Rosh Hashanah is only v'chesreina. And the Pnimis of Shabbos is beyond that. This is unbelievable. So in addition to what the Rebbe said on the previous page, that Shabbos Breishis is the culmination of Tishrei because it's Kizavayol Oretz, it brings it into the world. There's the other side of Shabbos, that Shabbos reaches higher than the Pnimius HaKavan of Rosh Hashanah. It's how Hashem has a delight, which is not only not necessary for the world to exist, it's also not necessary for the world's purpose as per Rosh Hashanah needs in order to exist. And on Shabbos it comes into the world by itself. But that's not enough. That's not enough. So Shabbos is placed on a pedestal above everything. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shavuos even. And on the other hand, the Rebbe continues and he says, "V'achidushu." The other side of Shabbos, the other novelty of Shabbos is Shagam Inyan Zeh Nimshach b'Mitzias Ha'elamis. This Shabbos, this delight of Shabbos, which is so high according to this Perek Hey, which is higher even in the Pnimis HaKavan of Rosh Hashanah and the Pnimis HaKavan of Rosh Chodesh, because it's Einig, which is above Chesaron, comes into the world physically and actually, naturally. And he brings a raya. Just like physically we see we find the famous Gemara, the delight, physical pleasure. Just like Hatainug, delight, affects a breath in the physical leg of a person. He brings the Gemara that you have in Masechta Gittin about Aspasionos, Vaspian was sent to destroy the second Beis Hamikdash, and a runner came from Rome to announce that the Caesar died and he was employed to be the Caesar in his place, and he went back to Rome and he sent Titus to do his dirty work. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had told him before that he was going to become a melech. And then when the word came, he was putting on his shoes. He had one shoe on and one shoe off, and he couldn't take off the shoe he was wearing, and he couldn't put on the shoe he wasn't wearing. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai quoted the pasuk, Shmuah Teva Tedashenotzim. Shmuah Teva, a good piece of information, literally makes your physical bones fat because of the great pleasure that you're having. Which means, Hainu, second line from the bottom of page Nun Aleph, Sha'atainu Shukeh Chayesanal, delight, which is the highest of all faculties, Peil Gaba Makam Achitach, affects even the lowest Madreges, Be'etzem Regel, the foot's bones, that even though the foot is Einim Mispal Me'azecha Shabarash, your brain is not going to make your foot smart, but your pleasure is going to make your foot expand. So the Rebbe says Shabbos on the one hand is higher even than Rosh Hashanah, and in this context, Rosh should be al derech mashal seichel, and it can have an influence on the physical foot. So Shabbos is higher than Rosh Hashanah in its previous source, and Shabbos is more manifest in the physical world than anything else. It affects the feet of the person. And just like the Gemara describes, from a good piece of news, that it makes fat one's physical foot because of Malas HaTainug, the same is true on Shabbos. That on the one hand, it's above all the days of the week. Meaning, it is completely removed from the weekdays. It's not removed from the weekdays, it's removed from Rosh Chodesh, it's moved from Rosh Hashanah. So if Shabbos is so much higher than the weekdays, that it's even higher than Rosh Hashanah, higher than Rosh Chodesh, so two questions. How do the 6 days prepare for Shabbos, and how does Shabbos bless the 6 days after? And the answer says, that's the duality of Shabbos. Because it's Tainug, it's Medash and Otzem. Ubeyachadim zen at the same time, precisely because of this, Behem. Rosh Hashanah has its limits. There's a Pnimis and a Chitzenius. Rosh Chodesh has its limits. There's a Pnimis and a Chitzenius. Shabbos doesn't have those limits. Because Shabbos is so high, that it's higher than the Pnimis Dikakavan of Rosh Hashanah, it's Medash and Otzem. It naturally affects a richness in the physical world. And this is true of Shabbos Bechlal. And it's particularly true of Shabbos Breishis. So the Rebbe is saying here that on the one hand, Shabbos Breishis is the culmination of Tishrei, because it brings forward the Giluim of Tishrei into the whole year. And on the other hand, it adds something to what Tishrei is all about, which Tishrei doesn't even have. On both ends. A, it brings down an Einig, which is above Pnimis HaKavan of Brias Eilames, and B, it comes on the physical level. Which is why the Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Chodesh, all our calendar is tluyim b'meil dalavan, to do with the birth of the moon. It has to do with the juxtaposition of the sun and seasons, but it has to do with the birth of the moon. And Mashenkin Shabbos, what does Shabbos have to do with? So the Rebbe doesn't say that Shabbos has to do with the sun. He says Einei tali b'mhalacha levana. It's not connected to the moon. You could say it's connected to 7 suns. Every time you have 6, the sun goes up and comes down 7 times. Then you have Shabbat Otenein. It's Mahalach Galgal Hayemi. It has to do with the rotation of the entire universe every day. There's, according to the Rambam, 9 Galgalim, 9 orbits, as they're called in English. All of the stars, minus the planets, exist in what's called Galgal Hashmini, the 8th Galgal. The Galgal Hayemi has no stars at all. It's completely transparent. But the Galgal Hayemi is rotating from east to west. And every 24 hours, the entire universe spins around the earth, which is stationary. According to Torah, which is really hard to fathom physically. But that's what it is, al pi Torah. And Shabbos has to do with 7 rotations of the Galgal Hayemi. Now you can ask, why doesn't he say that Shabbos has to do with the sun? And I can give you a number of answers. And one of the answers I could give you is what happens if you're in the moon, if you're on a rocket. If you're traveling around the world in the kind of speed that every hour you have 30 minutes of daylight and 30 minutes of light. The Rambam writes, Hayem v'halayla u'le'ela muchav dal chois. A day is always 24 hours. Even though there are people who talk about if you'd be traveling in a rocket super speed, you'd have to put on film, take off film every hour or two. It's just not true. Because a day is 24 hours. And the idea that a day of 24 hours, no matter where you are and how you're going, is not about the sun. Because in relationship with the sun, you can accelerate. It's about the Galgal Hayemi. Because the Galgal Hayemi, you can't change it. You cannot go fast enough to change your relationship with it. Every 24 hours, it rotates around the whole universe, around the earth. So the Rebbe connects Shabbos to Galgal Hayemi. And he explains. And by the way, remember what I told you at the beginning of last class, right? Lois and Niflaos Gedel, the Rebbe said, means the sun, the heaven and the earth and the sun and the moon. The Galgal Hayemi is above all of that. And this is connected to Shabbos, and it has a physical effect on the world, to Dashanot. Shuha Galgal Shalamayla Mikol Azani Galam, it's the orbit which is above the whole universe. Kabbalistically, it's Kesed, which is higher than all of Ishtashlus, including Reish Hashanah, which is Chochmah. Which, I don't know if that's true, but it's connected to Reish. The notion of Shabbos is Hamshacha Shalamayla Memetzias Elam, is bringing forward godliness, which is completely beyond anything which has to do with the worldly form. Completely beyond anything which has to do with the worldly form. And on the one hand, Shabbos is that high, and on the other hand, Shabbos is Medashanot. So it's like all bets are off. You're talking about the weekdays, you're talking about Shabbos, you're talking about the outer world, you're talking about the inner world. All of those things end at the threshold of Shabbos. Because Shabbos is higher than any Yom Tov, than the previous of any Yom Tov. And Shabbos' natural physical effect on the physical world is lower than any Yom Tov. It's Medashan Atzam of an Eine Yehudi, of a Goy. So the Rebbe gave us this whole Mamer about Lois Lefois Zelzavadi being only a Siyah. And then the Yid is Makachi Shmecha, which is even higher than that, and the Yid renew. That's a big deal, yeah? Now the Rebbe says there's something even higher than the Makachi Shmecha of Yom Tov. And that's Shabbos and Shabbos Breishis. But he's not finished. Now the Rebbe says that Shabbos, which is higher than the Chayes Aleki, which is Shaychas El-Elumis of Reish Hashanah, also has 2 dimensions. The Shabbos, which is above Rosh Hashanah as it is by itself, and the Shabbos, which is above Rosh Hashanah, which is able to add another Kedusha to. Now you tell me what these levels mean. If Shmecha, right, Niflaos Del Zavadi is Shmaya Kol Ba'atzmusei, and that's Lois, it's nothing Lagabe Yatzmus. And the Yidid Makachi Shmecha is adding a Kedusha to that Madrega of shame. So, and Shabbos is higher than all that. And then there's an even higher Shabbos, the Shabbos of Makachi Shmecha. What are we talking about in terms of Ishtalshlos? We have no concept of what these levels mean. But let's read it. V'gam b'inyin zeh, even in this notion that on Shabbos there's Hamshachas Atanik D'yema Shabbos Shalamalim Elamis. Shabbos brings a delight into the world which is not only higher than the world of the Chitzanistic level. It's higher than the world. When you incorporate into the world the avoid and the effect of Reish Hashanah, this is an oinig which is above even. The pnimistic achayis brought toward Rosh Hashanah, and it affects the physical world. Shmuel Tev D'Dashanotzim, and then we can add even more to this Shabbos. Peil and Bnei Yisrael ilu godel b'Yisrael. Even Shabbos, which is higher than Rosh Hashanah, a yitkim makadosh is Hashem of this Shabbos as well. Dine. After Shabbos makacha v'kaim, although Shabbos Kedusha happens by itself, like it says in the Gemara, and it's brought in Chassidus. Yom Tov we create makadosh Yisrael v'azman, Yisrael inu. Dikachinu Lizman. Mashenkin, Shabbos is Makadesh as the Shabbos by itself. At the same time, Chassidus point out, based on the many psukim that describe Shabbos, and keeping Shabbos, that Yidden's Avodah can be add an even higher pleasure to the pleasure of Shabbos. Like it says in the Pasuk, there's the Bekarasol Shabbos, there's the simply calling forward the Einik Shabbos, which the Eibishter put into Shabbos, which the Rebbe mentioned on the previous page. It's about, 9 lines from the bottom of page Nun Aleph. And now he brings a Baba, Gerosla Shabbos, there's a Div Lasis Shabbos, to create a whole new Einik Shabbos. That Ayadei Avedosim, Yidden do work. And exactly what are we doing? Kleine Menchelach, and Elam Hazeh HaMaisa. Be'ef and the Torah, Be'erev Shabbos, we do our work before Shabbos, which of course doesn't only include eating and working, it includes also Avedis HaBirurim, Dir B'Tachtenim. When Shabbos comes in, so physically you're eating basar shaman v'yayin yashin, delicious meat and tasty wine, which is tainug. But spiritually, this means that there's an itasiv b'Shabbos. We add a dimension of pleasure to Shabbos beyond the natural pleasure of what Shabbos is, which is already beyond Rosh Hashanah. Ayadei avedasam she'etzos u'davayd of Yidden. And the reason why this is possible is mitzad gei del malosam sheisol, the great advantage of the Yiddish neshamas that are called makache shmecha, which this Mamer revolves around, as did the Mamer of Besukkos Teishu Shivas Yamim called as Dechvei Yeshu Besukkos. But the shmecha on this Mamer is much higher than the shmecha in the previous Mamer, and now the shmecha of Shabbos is far higher than the shmecha of Rosh Hashanah. It's unbelievable. Whereas Yidden are one with the Eibishter, like the Teres HaMagid which I mentioned before in the previous class. Yidden add additional kedusha from the Eibishter himself to his name. And by the way, this clue deserves so much attention because l'chayda we're dealing with madrigas that are not only higher than hu, they may be even higher than ata, but we have no time. And therefore, first of all, they renew the Eibish's kingship on Rosh Hashanah, which is bringing back the Pnimis HaKavan in the world, which is a yin from Makache Shmecha. But second of all, Hamshachas Atayne B'Yom Shabbos. They bring delight into Shabbos beyond the natural delight of Shabbos, which is beyond the Pnimis HaChayit of Rosh Hashanah, which is called Chayes V'Kiyam HaElamis. And he concludes, Shemezayum Shachal Hashanah Kula, that Rosh Hashanah, Shabbos Breishis part, which is now, on the one hand, the physical manifestation of everything in Tishrei. On the other hand, the representation of an einig which is beyond even the pnimis achayis, which is Yektet Rosh Hashanah, how that's being brought into the physical world through pleasure. We can enhance that pleasure further through Makache Shmech. Now you tell me what that means in Avodah, I don't have a clue. But the Rebbe is speaking here such high madregas. No one speaks such madregas. Such high madregas. And the ultimate truth of everything the Rebbe is teaching us is how great the Rebbe understands the neshama of a Yid. Now, it's still at a Shabbos Kedesh Pashas Neach, and we're in the middle of a Milchama, and everybody is, as my friend from Etzisol tells me, stay in your lane, is doing their part. I can't go and be Leicha Milchemes Havayeh, at Veshura Milchemes Mitzvah, to protect Jewish people, and to give Jewish people a safety in their own land. But my job, my job is to teach Chassidus. So this is the 8th Mamer I've taught in a month. Kemat. It's Hey Cheshvan, but this is the 8th Mamer since Rosh Hashanah. I'm really at the beginning of next week. I'm going to teach the Mamer of Neach. I already have it prepared right here. Kika Asher Hashemayim Achadosh V'Oros Achadosh Asher Ani Oise Kenyam Ezaracha V'Shimchem B'li Neder of Ezer Hashem Yizbarach. And I will have taught all 9 Maimorim at that point. And the Rebbe said during Chedesh Tishrei of the 50 years ago, the Muhammad Yom Kippurim, and the lessons and the inspiration and the koyach HaTorah, which is higher than the koyach HaTfilah, that the Rebbe brought into the world, he's bringing into the world right now to give Yidden Hatzlacha. Every single soldier should come home safe and whole in body and in mind and in soul to his family and to his community and to his people. And Hashem should protect the Jewish people to be strong and self-respecting and proud and to live without any fear. I wish we say take him yad mamish the gula mitzvah shleima the Mashiach tzidkenu. Amen, amen, amen.